Hey guys, Ralph here, and today I'm going to show you how to replace your control arm as well as ball joint replacement on your Nissan Juke. Things we need: some basic hand tools. We have this jack and jack stand to lift the car. We have this socket set with ratchet, the impact socket set. We also have this pin punch to remove the bolts. We have this hammer, open socket wrench. I have the 21mm to remove the lug nuts. I have this special tool, just rented it from Advanced Auto Parts to remove the ball joints. We also have these torque wrenches, breaker bar. I also got this wrench, the impact wrench. But if you don't have this impact wrench, you can always use the basic hand tools, the ratchet. And also have this control arm, new control arm to replace the old one, and a pry bar and a wire brush. First is we're going to jack up the car. Use a 21mm socket and a breaker bar. We need to crack the lug nuts free before we raise the vehicle. Once we fully raise the vehicle, we can remove the lug nuts now as well as the tire. You can try to spray some penetrating fluid on the ball joint. Let it soak for a while, as well as the two bolts holding the control arm. We got one here on this side, the outer and the inner, and on the other side right here. After you pre-soak those nuts, we're going to remove it now. So we're going to remove the ball joint nut using a breaker bar on one side and a ratchet, which is a 14mm on the other side. And since we have our impact wrench, we're going to use it to make our life more easy, but you can always use the breaker bar and an open socket wrench. Remove the bolt out using a hammer and a metal punch. Just don't hit it too hard to avoid mushrooming the end of the bolt. As you can see, the bolt is pretty much stuck, so we're going to use more penetrating fluid and let it soak for a while. So after a lot of tries, we got the bolt out, and as you can see, it's pretty rusted. Now we're going to use the pickle fork, also called a ball joint separator, to separate the ball joint from the knuckle. Just hammer it in between the knuckle and the ball joint, but if you don't have this special tool, you can always use a pry bar to separate these two. As you can see, it's pretty hard to separate the ball joint from the knuckle. And if that's the case, we're going to try another way, which is removing those bolts that holds the control arm. So we got the two bolts here, and we're going to remove this first, then separate the ball joint from the knuckle. Use a 21mm socket on the bottom and 21mm open wrench on the top to prevent the bolt from spinning. You can always use a breaker bar, or if you have, you can use the impact wrench like I did. Loosen the second bolt out using an 18mm socket and a breaker bar, or impact wrench and an 18mm wrench on top. After removing those two bolts, just wiggle the control arm a little bit and it should come right off. So that's our control arm hanging from the ball joint, and we're going to hammer it down until it separates from the knuckle. This is what the old control arm looks like. We got really bad ball joint. Before installing the new control arm, try to clean the knuckle using a wire brush to remove those rust and dirt. Try to clean the inside as well, where the two bolts are located, before putting back the new control arm. As you can see here, our ball joint is pretty messed up, so it's a good thing that we're going to replace it. And here's our new parts, the new control arm for the Juke. They're the same. Ball joint is good. There's those bushings, so everything's fine. Now we're going to install the new control arm and slide the innermost part first. Turn the steering wheel facing the driver's side, so it will be easier to slide the other part. Use a hammer and tap a little to line up the hole. You can also use a pry bar or a screwdriver to align the control arm. Once you align the control arm, you can slide the bolt back to those holes. Once we're done with those two bolts, we can now align the ball joint to the knuckle. Just use a hammer and tap it a little bit. All good. And just remember, we're going to tighten these bolts when the car is sitting normally to prevent the wear out of the bushings prematurely. Put the bolt back on the knuckle. Use a hammer to tap the bolt. And once the bolt is in, use a 14mm open wrench on one side and a ratchet on the other side, and start tightening the bolt. Now we're going to use this torque wrench and torque the bolt to 28 foot-pounds. Put the tire back because we're going to tighten those two bolts when the tire is on the ground. Once the tire is on the ground, torque the 18mm bolt, which is the outermost, to 111 foot-pounds. That's good. And we're going to torque down this other bolt as well. The other bolt's right here, which is a 21mm bolt. Torque it down to 75 foot-pounds.
This is good.
The last step is to tighten those lug nuts back. Use a 21mm socket and a torque wrench. Tighten those lug nuts to 75 to 80 foot-pounds. A simple rule: always follow the star pattern when torquing those lug nuts to tighten them evenly. And that's how you replace and install new control arm on your Nissan Juke. And I suggest to have your alignment checked at your local auto shop. And if you find this video helpful, please click like and subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching.